Okay, well, hey everyone. Let's just wait a few minutes till everyone joins. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names. Thanks everyone for taking the time to join us. My name is Liron Mendel. I'm Director of Product Marketing for Sci. So we'll just wait another second. Okay, well, 2023 is pretty much over, and I can say without a doubt that it has been one of the most intensive years in cybersecurity. And I'm happy to sit here with you guys to discuss how the industry has changed during this year, and a little bit of how 2024 will look. Now, as most of you know, every year Gartner releases their top 10 predictions on all sorts of subjects. And one of their predictions for the upcoming year is actually that CISOs will gain 45 more power. That's a quote, which we all know is a nicer way of saying responsibility. And that's probably due to the fact that the new regulations that have come out and the attack surface that's expanding, and also probably has to do with the fact that during 2023, there were pretty dramatic events. But maybe before we dive in, we can start with a quick round of introductions. Ruby, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, of course. So hi everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I'm Robert Onashvili. I'm the founder and the CEO of Sci. I started my professional career in the Israeli army. This is quite common in Israel. That's a mandatory service. But I've been through an academic journey in which I've done my B Science and M Science degree in computer science and math. Then I joined the cybersecurity unit of the IDF, which was extremely interesting, maybe the most interesting thing that I've done in my life. There I was responsible to build the Israeli Red Team Section 21, and I took part in Section 25 and 26 as well, without getting into the details. I've done 7 years of service there, which was intense, interesting, but definitely educating. And 2012, I founded Sci, and since then working as a CEO, keep myself highly technical and hands-on, despite being the CEO of the company. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. You want to continue?
Yeah, my name is Mike Wilkes, and one of my assertions of identity is adjunct professor at NYU, where I teach cybersecurity. I've created 3 courses for NYU, most recently a course on cybersecurity, threat intelligence, and analytics, which is a part of the 9-month CISO certification and CIO program. Previously, I've been the CISO for Security Scorecard, a security ratings firm. Before that, ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, which is a small $1.2 billion revenue organization. But I was the first security officer in the history of the 104-year-old organization. So I built the security program there. I'm a jazz musician. I play music, and I'm an ASCAP member. And then before that, most people like to hear stories about my time when I was the head of security at Marvel, where my tagline joke is that it was my job to keep Iron Man safe. So I've been around for a long time. I've been building, infrastructure for the internet. Launched Starbucks' first website back in 1998. Ran the team that gave birth to PlayStation.com for the PS2. So I'm like I said, old as the hills. Been around since even before the World Wide Web and Port 80. If anyone remembers the Gopher protocol that ran on Port 70, that is one of the first things that I used as a server and administrator when I worked for a think tank in California. But excited to share some of the experience that I have. I'm a CISO, but I'm also working with the World Economic Forum on the Quantum Security Working Group and Cyber Resilience Working Group in the oil and gas industry. So critical infrastructure certainly is vulnerable. And anything we can do to share information, I've worked with the ISACs, the Information Sharing and Analysis Centers in the U.S. For the last few years in the maritime sector and in oil and gas and national defense. Really, cybersecurity is an issue at this point of national security. So happy to chat with you, reflect on the previous year, and talk a little bit about how we're thinking about our budgets moving into next year.
Nice to have you. Matt, you're up.
Good morning. So my name is Matt Webster. I'm the founder and CEO and CISO of Cyvergence. It's a relatively new organization. I have been a chief information security officer 3 times. I've been a global chief information security officer as well, and GRC and security officer. So I've been around the block. I've also spent a long stint in federal government cybersecurity and wrote the book on Do No Harm, protecting connected medical devices. So it's a little more complicated, but essentially it's about Internet of medical things. So I've been around the block, like Mike, been 25 plus years in the industry. Most of those have been in cybersecurity, and happy to be here today. And hopefully, I can help out everybody along the way.
Happy to have you with us, and maybe we can start the discussion by kind of summarizing 2023, and maybe we can start with asking you guys, in your eyes, what do you think the most significant events that happened during 2023? I know that there were a lot, but maybe for each of you guys, what was the like one event that kind of stood out? Feel
Well, if you're
free.
talking about what stood out, I mean, that's a big ask. And so if you talk to the CISOs of the world, I think the whole situation with SolarWinds and Tim Brown was a huge watershed moment. And people in those senior leadership positions, and I think also CIOs are taking note of what's happening in that particular industry. I think that it's going to have repercussions 10 years down the road. And so just from a regulatory standpoint, I think that's going to cause some drastic change across the board. I mean, we've saw stuff in the New York Department of Financial Services. There's a Security Exchange Commission's modifications of the Form 8Ks and so on. Federal Trade Commission. There's even health regulations that are changing here in New York for Kathy Hochul, what she's been doing. That's going to affect a lot of the hospital cybersecurity. So there's really been a lot from a regulatory standpoint that's going to be upsetting the status quo. It's just a top thing that hits my mind.
Agree, agree. Ruby, I think you have a lot. I think you're trying to say something.
No, I think, I mean, I have several things that were significant in 2023. I can talk about one of them that to me was pivotal in the way that I think about cybersecurity for maybe for VIPs or executives in the organization. Just to explain that for a second, 2023 was the first year when I saw actual attack against family members of a CEO becoming an organizational attack, meaning something that started as a regular, let's say, sextortion attack, regular as much as you can call it regular, right? But a teenager was actually extorted based on sexual content, and then when she was asked to pay something and she couldn't, the next step from the attackers, and that was the surprise thing or the new thing to me, was that they actually instruct her how to get to her father's computer, put something in the computer, and actually get initial access to the organization using a command and control channel that they were able to deploy by instructing her on how to do that, which was the first time that I heard about
Wow.
the connection between sextortion, working from home, trust between family members, and the fact that she had actually access to her father's computer, which is not protected by the organizational protection concept, right? So that's something that was extremely uh, interesting to see, very risky, but extremely interesting. And the second thing that happened in 2023, obviously, this is the war in Israel. Without getting into the political aspect of things, that's something that definitely had impact on, one of the largest cybersecurity hubs of the world. And one thing that was surprisingly, positively surprising, maybe, the fact that the industry and the tech industry here in Israel actually managed to keep everything going without any impact to the industry in general, which is couldn't be more proud than what to see what's happening here. So that was 2023 to me. And
Why do you think that is, by the way? What do you think is so special about the Israeli tech industry that was like it wasn't moved by this like massive situation that was going on in Israel?
two things. One, I think that we have no choice. That's very simple, right? It's either we are here or not, right? And
Right.
from my point of view, there is something very special in the Israeli solidarity concept, right? So we can fight all year, we can, blame each other for a lot of things, but when a crisis happens, right, everyone is united and working together as a crisis. I can tell you that the number of, you know, um, maybe recommendations that I've provided for other companies here in Israel, the number of good things that I've heard others speaking about us and so on, that's something that I didn't see before. So the industry in general is really here to support each other, and that's something that I really appreciate. And we're all hopeful that that continues right after this, tough situation that we have now in Israel, which hopefully will be solved soon. Yeah, that's my point of view.
Thank you for
We're
that, and I couldn't agree more.
all waiting to hear
My
Mike now.
Yeah, I would agree with the high level directionality that Matthew started off with, which is regulatory. And obviously, the SolarWinds case is a precedent setting, and it hasn't happened yet, right? We've started to read the complaint, and we've acknowledged the fact that there's never been a chief information security officer handed a Wells notice before. And so how this plays out will be very impactful. If I wanted to come up with a category or a bucket to put it into, you're familiar with like data and information, and then information becomes knowledge, and knowledge becomes wisdom. It's the DIKW pyramid. And teaching at NYU, I've used this as a slide where I talk about how certain things evolve and mature up that pyramid. And so I think what we're seeing regulatory turn from like a data kind of exercise and function to what we might term regulatory intelligence, right? Just like you have business data and business intelligence and BI platforms, I'm starting to get the sense that the FTC and the SEC and NYDFS for certain are starting to go for data-driven, quantified understanding of risk to their covered entities. And so they're basically developing regulatory intelligence. And so I mean that to kind of tongue-in-cheek joke that they were stupid before, and now they're becoming more intelligent. But really, regulatory is stepping up. And NYDFS has some really great stuff that just came out, which is some of it is now effective as of December 1st. And one of the other big items, that they just enacted for their roughly 3,000 covered entities that perform, the financial services sector here in New York, is that the CISO has to sign, along with the highest ranking executive officer, a compliance or non-compliance statement. For all of calendar year 2023. So it's not like you're going to be able to use, the next 2-3 weeks to finish off the year and get compliant, right? It's basically going to be a come to, well, the phrase is come to Jesus moment, but anyway, the idea is that you're going to have a lot of these organizations going to have to decide, are we compliant or are we not? And it has to do with reporting and transparency, and with MFA, and with doing risk assessments. And so I really think that this is a good trend, but it is going to give us some consternation and grief as security officers because of the propensity for companies to throw us under the bus, right? And so I think that's certainly one of the themes right now, is that with regulatory oversight and increased visibility of these security programs and postures, you're going to see, unfortunately, more scapegoating until we sort of unite, as a profession. I was joking. I was thinking, the CISOs, what we should do? We should have a strike. We should go on strike, just like the Hollywood writers. And we should all just take a week off, right? And see what happens. See, you need us now, right?
but let me ask you this, since all of you guys kind of touched on the new regulations, I want to get your kind of insight on, do you guys actually think that these new regulations actually make the organizations more secure? Are they helping?
In a
I'll
way,
kind of jump in here. I think that it's going to be problematic to begin with. I think there'll be a little bit of an exodus from the CISO perspective for the organizations that don't have the type of transparency that's required to get the job done. But I think what we're seeing now, as Mike was pointing out, a lot of the regulatory agencies are trying to figure out, they know there's a problem, but they're trying to figure out how do we handle the problem. So they are throwing blanket statements out there that are some cases factually inaccurate, but they're hoping to catch some of the CISOs in some of the issues that are going on here. I think a lot of businesses have been very open. It's been my experience working with legal teams in the past that they have not paid attention to, say, the Security Exchange Commission, even though they put out a statement years ago that they are going to be stepping up what they're doing. And so now I think that companies are going to start paying more attention to what's going on as a result of things. So I think that this is going to start to change the security culture in a positive direction. I think some of the requirements are great. So, like NYDFS, for example, is now requiring that you encrypt um, non-public information. Usually companies are going to require, let's do the bare minimum. Let's encrypt sensitive data like PII, FTI, PHI, and so on. So I think it's going to increase and decrease the amount of risk for the organization in the long run, but I think it's going to create some consternation with security teams, IT teams, the business leaders, and so on. But I think, in the past, some of the challenges that CISOs are facing, in terms of communication and making sure they have lines to the board, I think they're going to be asking a lot more before they step into the roles, or if they're in the roles, due to the legislation that's out there. They've got to be a lot more transparency. I've worked with a lot of CISOs in the past, and what I'm seeing is there's a lot of challenges in terms of transparency, even within the company and up to the board of directors. They have a fiduciary responsibility now to make a change and try to do something a lot better. So even some of the regulations like the SEC, what it's focusing on, they want to make sure that you have some sort of cybersecurity expertise. They're not requiring a chief information security officer to also be in the board of directors, but they're requiring the expertise. And I think it's going to be a little bit of a learning game as it goes on. But now they're also on the hook to try to figure out what's going on within the organizations. They always have been, but they've been looking at the financial organizations and the overall health of the company. I think cybersecurity is going to be raised just a little bit in some organization. I think that will be enough to start the ball rolling in a positive direction, is how I see it.
Okay, I agree. And I also think that it's interesting that a lot is, being written about the fact that the CISO's role is kind of evolving due to the new regulations. Ruby, would you like to kind of give us your input on how you think these new regulations will kind of evolve the role of the CISO?
Yeah, so I think, just also maybe referring to the previous question and to the evolving role of the CISO. So I think that one thing for sure, as Matt just mentioned, the visibility to the boardroom, right? Being able to communicate more freely, not because you want to push that, but because the board wants actually to consume it because they need to know, right? They need to know in order to be transparent, in order to be able to communicate outside. And they need to know because they are also accountable for that. That's something that is really important, right? So the CISO will get much more, let's say, respect from management, and not only respect, they actually need the input that is able to provide in a way that they are able, of course, to understand. So again, it should be not only technical kind of analysis, but something that can be translated to the management language. But one thing that I'm always concerned about when it comes to regulation compliance in general is how do you make sure that you take it to the right places with the right incentives and so on, not only the fines on the one hand, but also incentives to the organization to avoid a tick the box kind of exercise, which you try to do the bare minimum in order to be compliant, right? Which is not security, right? From my point of view, just being compliant doesn't mean that you actually improved your security situation in the organization. So I think that now there is actually an opportunity. I think that the CISO, with also what was mentioned before with Tim Brown, so I think that the CISO all in general is being reevaluated, right? People understand that on the one hand, this is something risky now, right? Which is, again, very negative from my point of view to the industry, because people are starting to think much more insurance and how do I protect myself rather than how do I protect the organization, which is natural, right? And no one wants to be thrown under the bus, right? That's something that I really understand. But on the other hand, the fact that the cybersecurity discussion is there, people are speaking about it. Board members are actually asking that, and I had this year I maybe joined several tens or maybe even hundreds of board meetings during the last 12 to 18 months. And I can tell you the discussion is different. The questions are being asked. If in the past it was, okay, are we secure? Which was a question that you cannot really answer. Now the questions are much more educated, right? Do we invest enough?
Really?
What is the efficiency level of what we do? What are the chances for us to get this kind of attack? Do we protect our supply chain? Questions that I didn't hear in the past. And this is something that is very positive, and I think that's also maybe a direct impact of what's happening with regulation and legislation lately. So from my point of view, there are definitely positive aspects to it. The only thing that I'm saying is that government should also step up in general and not only provide the fines on the one hand, but also provide some kind of mechanism or incentives also to the people, to the companies to be able to improve their cybersecurity level in general.
Okay.
That's my personal opinion right now.
Yeah, I think
I
that's a good point.
agree. Now, yeah, Mike, I just wanted to touch on the fact that, you wrote a great article for us on cognitive risk in the boardroom. And I think that one of the biggest questions is how can the board ask or challenge maybe security leaders when they don't really know security? So maybe if you can kind of elaborate on that.
Sure. Yeah, I think Ruvy's got a really good um, perspective on the changing nature of those boardroom discussions. Previously, I was going to be, I was going to mention an anecdote. Like board members were just simply asking me during the break, what company should I invest in, right? Because they wanted to, have like investment advice from a CISO who's technologist, and what are the emerging trends? How can I get in on something or ground level? And now they're just like, now they're actually asking substantive questions about the security program, but they're not there yet. There's this concept of effective challenge, right? They can ask a question. They can read the NACD, right? The National Association of Corporate Directors Guidebook for Board Cybersecurity Oversight, and they can parrot those questions. But are they going to understand the answer or be able to effectively challenge the answer that they get? That's, I think, where we need some more growth. So when I talk about cognitive risk and cognitive risk in the boardroom, there are known biases, right? Confirmation bias, too big to fail. There's all sorts of issues that we don't pay enough attention to, I think, when we talk about risk management. Everyone's talking about data and encryption and detection and backups, but really the biggest risk is between our ears. The cognitive perception of risk is sometimes completely skewed, right? Where we go for like an inverted, risk matrix, where we go for the flashy 0 days, right? It's like a shiny thing syndrome, and everyone's like, "Oh, we should tackle those," right? But this is not an Olympic, diving competition where you get extra points for difficulty, right? We really want to go for the basics, and I think that's my advice to board members everywhere. Don't get distracted by the sexy, shiny things. Do the basics first, right? Have proper backups. That's how you mitigate a ransomware attack. You just think of the laptop and the server as disposable. You don't pay the ransom because it's not the only place the data lives. And make sure your backups are protected offsite or on a third party, with less access from the account that got compromised, because they like to delete your backups or encrypt your backups as well. And then corollary to this sort of um, educating the board and bringing up the board's level, they're never going to be cybersecurity experts, and no one's ever going to expect them to be cybersecurity experts. But we do need to move them from being cyber curious to cyber aware. And once we do that, I think as an industry and as security professionals, we owe it to them to do the reverse. By this, I mean, you've all heard about security awareness training. Don't use weak passwords. Don't reuse your passwords, right? And we force
Right.
people to do this boring talking head training every year. What about business awareness training for security people? I think that's the piece that's missing. We need to also get some better soft skills into our security leadership teams who don't descend into this crazy moon language of CVSS scores and CVEs and patching cadence, and all of this kind of stuff is just glazing over the eyes of the executives. And so we need to speak in their language. We need to understand the business. We can't be the Department of No. We have to be not yet, and then suggest otherwise how we get forward with this new feature that they want, like, I don't know, some kind of like thing called LLM, right? But we don't want to talk about that, and AI and Chat GPT, right? That's a boring topic. No
Actually,
one's interested in
actually,
that.
I do want to talk about AI. That was like my next question. But yeah.
No, let's go.
Okay, so yeah, I actually did want to touch base about AI because it's it's like the new but not so new buzzword that we're hearing like everywhere. It's all over the place. It's all everyone is talking about. And I wanted to actually ask Matt, as one of the lead experts, in cybersecurity, how do you think AI will impact cybersecurity? you know, with great knowledge comes great, you know, danger, I want to say, but you know, for better or for worse, how do you think it'll impact us?
So I think we're at the beginning stages of large language models and artificial intelligence. We have a long ways to go to step it up to the next level. I think that it's got a lot of use right now. It's able to accelerate a lot of the internal processes. If you want to write policies and procedures, you can do some generic stuff, and you can pull from different sources and augment what you're doing. And so it's a force multiplier for a lot of organizations. So I think, it is clearly in use. It's not going to take us all the way there. I think that you have to take into account the nuances of the organization. Where companies have to be careful of is data. And the way I look at AI, as much as I look at anything else, you have to be careful about the data that you're putting into artificial intelligence. But I would say that about any type of SaaS application that you're using, whether it's, something like a tool like Grammarly or some of the other tools that are out there. You have to be really careful about that data, and it goes down to the appropriate data governance and the responsibilities that organizations have to protect that data. And so if people start to understand that if they put data up in the cloud, that cloud can then use that data however they want in many cases, that's really where the issues are starting to come in. So I think that we're going to start to see some changes. We've already seen a lot of organizations, having worked with a lot of CISOs and others. I see a large percentage of organizations flat out just blocking artificial intelligence. There's a number of organizations that
Really?
are starting to purchase. Oh yeah, absolutely. I've seen that question in some of the uh, things that I've been at, but they're also bringing in and purchasing artificial intelligence that'll stay within the organization itself and not go outbound because it is a productivity multiplier. Also, I'm seeing some organizations, well, let's take a little more intelligent approach and we're going to give people the authorization to use artificial intelligence, but train them to make sure that they're not doing anything. In some cases, I've seen organizations use something called data loss prevention. They've got something called fingerprinting that can be done. Now, that's a very tough thing to do for a lot of organizations. It's definitely not done across the board, but I've seen a few organizations try to use fingerprinting to make sure that the DLP is not going outbound to some website or another. The other side of it is making sure that people are really aware. So if you're using something to create a digital image, there are some issues that are coming up with that from both the privacy side and the legal side of whatever's coming out of that work that's being done. So I think creating that sort of awareness, getting people aware of plagiarism and some of the other uh, sorts of issues is going to be an extremely important part of artificial intelligence. But I think it's all about creating the right balance for the organization because you don't want to use just whatever was spat out of these AI tools, but they can be a big help, like trying to figure out what are the marketing words that I need to pay attention to if the marketers are trying to use that to create a website or create some information that's going to be out there. There's a lot of fantastic tools that are on the marketplace today. So seeing what the contracts are, going through the legalese, understanding what the cybersecurity issues. So this is a place where legal and cybersecurity can work really well together, but also use that as part of their security awareness training programs. As Mike was talking about too, the business awareness, you have to make them aware, but also bring it, be able to speak their language. Well, what's the impact of that going to be? And this is where you work with the legal teams and you're starting to see, cyber risk quantification starting to jump into the marketplace a little bit more than it was in the past. And there are processes out there like FAIR that allow you to do appropriate cyber risk quantification. I think these are going to become more and more important as you start to discuss those issues because AI is not a black and white issue. It's a pro and con issue, and what is the risk versus the reward, and what is the best approach that organizations are going to take today. So I don't think it's a one size fits all approach that anybody would take towards artificial intelligence today.
Yeah, I think we're just like touching the beginning of this. It'll be interesting to see if we had the same discussion in like a year to kind of see where things went. Um, and another thing around
We'll
cyber
probably
risk
have to
quantification.
invite we'll probably have to invite some type of artificial intelligence person to the conversation who's going to be summarizing everything for us, right? So we'll have like some kind of avatar, right, if we do this again next December.
I seriously wouldn't be surprised. But since you
Yeah,
guys touch base with what
there are
movie,
capabilities.
sorry?
There are capabilities in the market already for this kind of avatars and transcripting capabilities. But one thing that we need to take into consideration on top of everything that we've mentioned, Liron, sorry to stop you there, is that the same tools are available today for force multiplier in the organization, that's for sure. Keep in mind that the same tools capabilities are also available for attackers. So something to keep in mind, we always say that every cybersecurity tool today, you go out there, it's the buzzword, right? Everyone is using generative AI, and everyone is using LLMs, and everyone is using, in the past it was the machine learning and deep learning capabilities that were evolving over the time, right? So from my point of view, just two things to remember. Usually, when you have the same tool used for defense and offensive kind of activities, we see that the offense world is moving faster. Again, it's very simple, quick and dirty for their point of view is okay. You don't need to be enterprise grade. You don't need to make sure that you don't have any harm. You don't need to be careful about privacy, about data leakage, and so on. So you can move faster. Second thing that we need to take into consideration is that when those tools are out there, we see always exponential growth when something starts to be effective from the offensive world perspective. So definitely something to expect. I don't think that we are not ready as an industry because again, everything around artificial intelligence, everything around LLMs, those are more techniques, trying to reduce maybe the effort, the manual effort that was used in the past on how to react, how to identify the specific data that you need in order to create a credible message for a phishing campaign, right? That's something that took time in the past. You were collecting information and so on. Now you can do that with a click of a button. However, organizations in any case should be already prepared for that. So I don't think that is going to change everything in the world, and the world is not prepared, and we need to be in a chaotic situation or panic situation at the moment. However, we need to pay attention that things will change. Password quality, this is always an issue, right? Mike
Right.
mentioned, go back to the basics, right? So the basics will be much more important now. So things that were assumed to be done manually in the past or by a human behavior, those are things that today we need to take more into consideration. Even basic things like voice recognition in our bank, bank activation. That's something that we have at least in Israel, right? You can speak with your bank with an automated bot on the other side that you can actually provide instructions for transaction. That's something that is based on voice recognition. Now with deepfake, that's something that you can bypass quite easily. We've done that, right? So those are things that we just need to take into consideration. I'm not saying that it's the end of the world. I'm just saying let's know that it's there and react accordingly. That's the point. Or proactively even, not react, right? So that's
That
my point
that's
of view.
super that's super interesting, and you made a few really good points. And since before that, you guys were talking about cyber risk quantification, and I think that the first thing that comes to mind when I at least hear cyber risk quantification is also budget planning. And I know that probably a lot of our audience here today is they're in the midst of planning, their cybersecurity budgets for 2024. And maybe each of you guys, from your experience, can leave them with a tip when planning and when doing the budget, in like your main one tip. If you had to give them one tip, what do you guys tell them?
I can start with that one. When I used to work at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, I was on the enterprise server platform team. I wasn't doing security, but I had earned the nickname the GIS Whisperer, which I think you can understand. GIS is usually an acronym for Global Information Security, and it's usually like this five-headed hydra of paranoid endpoint people and restrictive firewall management people, and you have policy, and they often didn't even collaborate and talk to each other. And I think that the challenge that we had, and a lot of organizations have, whether you're multiple billions of dollars or at the CME a quadrillion dollars in contracts traded on your platform, you have to think about what the top of the org chart is doing to make things better and what the bottom of the org chart is doing to try to make things better, because sometimes they're at odds. And again, this emphasizes a little bit of that cognitive risk theme that you mentioned, which is we had like five different tools that had been signed off for at the executive level that were completely redundant. We had, and think this is terribly material, non-public information, right? You can observe this stuff by looking at DNS and looking at, job descriptions of people that have worked at the CME over the many years. We had, Big Fix, we had Puppet, we had Chef, we had Blade Logic, we had Ansible. These are like 5 tools that all do the same thing. So my advice is, as we try to be, fiscally prudent with our budget for 2024, look for some cost avoidance. Look for tools that you can decommission that aren't delivering value, where it's redundant. Because if you have 2 or 3 tools that are doing the same thing, although it's nice to have 2 tools so they can validate and verify each other, having 3 or 4 or 5, just because someone at the top, like the CIO or the CISO or the CEO, signed a check because they read some trade magazine that says, oh, you need to have Tripwire, or oh, you need to have, this tool. They're trying to make things better, right? But they're looking for a silver bullet usually, right? They're saying, oh, all we have to do is buy this tool, implement it, and everything's fine. That's never the case. I'm fairly agnostic about tool choice, right? You can do everything well and you can do everything poorly. And if you implement 5 tools poorly, you're just wasting your money and your budget, right? So get good with one tool. Get to a 2.0 or a 3.0 level of maturity with that tool. So Ansible is one of my favorites because it's extensible. It doesn't have an agent. IBM bought, what was it? No. Yeah, I think it was IBM that bought Red Hat. Red Hat owns Ansible, so it's got a future. It's going to be around for a while. And don't fight, between the people that fall in love with Puppet or Chef as a configuration management tool. Just go for whatever one that you think can handle it for your platform. Give you that observability, give you that insight into what's happening on your platform, because that's the way you accomplish, effective mitigation of risk. And I love, Ruby's point about how compliance is just tick the box and go home. I would rather everyone focused on good security programs, because you pick up compliance along the way, right? You don't just stop with, oh, I have a firewall, check the box. Well, wait a minute, it's still in the box, right? That's the classic joke about firewalls, right? And compliance. Compliance-minded people don't care if the firewall is actually plugged in and turned on and doing anything. And so I think that my advice would be to try to find a tool or two that is redundant and decommission it and use that budget for something else. That way you remain budget neutral overall, but you're increasing the visibility and power of your insights and your tools. And just get good at one of them. Don't just keep looking for that next silver bullet.
Very insightful. Thank you for that. Matt, you want to take a shot at it?
I'm sure. I mean, I agree a lot of what Mike was saying there. To me, it's about also budgets. I was just reading again. I see this same sentiment echoed, but 50% of organizations are looking at cutting their cybersecurity budgets. I think there's a lot of concern about the futures, the wars that are going on globally. We're seeing some effect happening across the board, and even the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, has talked about some warnings that are coming up, and I think that's going to be on the minds of a lot of CISOs. So now the responsibilities are going up. They have got to make sure that they're getting things done. I like the collaborative approach that Mike was talking about, because I think that's absolutely critical. But find the tools that are going to be helpful. Um, for example, a lot of the compliance tools are able to automate it and pull that information in is extremely important. Exploit prediction scoring system is another step in the right direction. I think there's some challenges with it, but it's from a prioritization mechanism. It helps you to prioritize things in the right order. So when you're looking at all these different tools, think about how can you save money for your organization as a whole. Third-party risk is a big area. There's a lot of tools on the market that have um, um, AI built into it, large language models built into the responses, or they can copy responses that you put in the past. Or if you're trying to do them by Excel spreadsheet, or you're logging into a portal to do third-party risk, that's becoming more and more part of the process. But the more you can automate it, take that work off of your team, whether you're using a GRC tool or other types of tools to try to limit that work, that I think is going to be a big help. And towards that cyber risk quantification trend that we're seeing, a lot of tools are moving that direction. I think that's something else that's going to be important to utilize what's there. If you're looking at data posture security management, usually the larger organizations are starting to consider something like that. Many of them have cyber risk quantification that are built into them. So use those as a mechanism to talk to your company. I mean, Mike was talking before, and I 100% agree. CISOs need to speak the language of business. They need to be in there having the conversation with the business teams and letting them know transparently what the issues are and what is the financial impact. If you're not talking about the financial impact, there's a huge issue with the discussion and something's not getting across. Like high risk, what does that mean? I have seen CEOs just like, oh, high risk, I don't care. We hear that all the time, and they become numb to it because so much is
Right.
happening. And different people are going to approach the issues differently. But I think the other thing is getting into materiality. So if you're able to take a look at those and say, look, this $1 million risk that is being identified from a data posture security management tool, is that a critical risk for your organization or is that a low risk? That's something that you need to work out ahead of time. And so making sure that you get that risk aligned with the business is really critical. And that's something that doesn't take a lot of money. That's just sitting there having a conversation with the appropriate people in a security or a risk committee. And so that's starting to build and creating the alignment across the organization. So when I'm looking at tools, those are the types of things that I'd be looking at.
Okay. And Ruby, you probably have also something to say on this. I know that a lot of customers and clients, they need your help and you assist them and you go to the board with them. So if you could give them like one tip, what would your tip be?
Yeah, so first we've talked about, I mean, both Mike and Matt, they mentioned great things that we just need to make sure that are emphasized. First, what you learn from what Mike said, don't speak about budget in general, speak about budget efficiency. So do I invest in the right places? And if I invest, do I get the return on investment that I expect to get, right? Because investing or enlarging the budget, increasing the budget, that's one thing, but is it really increasing your cybersecurity maturity? That's a different question. So being able to measure return on investment, efficiency of the cybersecurity program, now connecting to what Matt said, that you are able to quantify that not only what will be the risk in case of a cybersecurity related incident, also what was the residual contribution of this capability that you've provided here. I have 100 million of risk. We implemented a DLP solution. How much did I reduce my risk now? Is it 2 million, 5 million, 10 million? This kind of return on investment analysis, comparing the cost with the potential risk reduction, this is key from my point of view to be able to speak in a very advanced way. But even if I take one step back and now going to my personal advice here, even if you are not that sophisticated, because sometimes it's hard to get to this level, at least to start with this level. You need to build the infrastructure in order to get there. From my point of view, you need to make sure that you are first covering the basics, right? Your budget has to make sure that everything that is basic, authentication, authorization, access management, network segmentation, things that are really fundamental and basics, like backups that were mentioned before by Mike, all of those elements has to be part of your budget, has to be tested. And of course, redundancies, if those are there, you need to always check and see whether those are relevant. But maybe the most important thing, when you present this kind of plan to your management, you need to be very clear. What do we get back? If I'm sitting in a board meeting and I'm asking the questions and you're asking for me X amount of dollars, the one thing that I expect to hear is where is going to take us, right? Any kind of KPI, risk reduction. We are now high, then we'll be medium. Or dollar value, if we are at that level, we are now 100 million, will be 70 million. Or maturity scoring, we are now 2.1, we will get to 2.8. Give me something that is measurable and has some kind of efficiency analysis integrated with it without getting me to the details of the CVSS scoring and the exploit that is out there. So that has to be in the management language, efficiency discussion, and in the end, ROI. Those are, from my point of view, the elements that will bring, I've seen that so many times. If you speak this way, you will get the budget. And now we'll give here maybe an IRA kind of sentence, the budget that you need, not the budget that you deserve, right?
Ira, even when he's not here, he's here. I agree. We're actually almost out of time. We're about out of time, actually. Maybe I see a few questions from the audience. Maybe I'll get a quick one question from the audience that kind of touches on what you guys kind of mentioned before. We have a question asking, how do you guys think the geopolitical situation, how it's affecting cybersecurity? Because, obviously the war in Israel, we have Ukraine, there are a lot of things going around. This year has been, it's had its share of wars. So how do you guys think that it's affecting?
Well, I'll answer this question as long as you give me a chance to talk about the digital potato famine, right? Because that was one of my predictions, and that was my teaser for people to watch us today. So, um, geopolitical is actually an interesting amplification of the fact that borders don't matter. And what I mean is, when Russia invaded the Ukraine, I needed to review all of the nationalities of all of my employees and all of my colleagues, regardless of what borders they live within at the moment, right? Because you can have, a Russian national who could be potentially an insider risk due to coercion and due to threats. Maybe they're not, motivated to do bad things, but maybe someone is going to extort, and threaten their family. And so that's the level of risk I think that the geopolitical battles right now are causing. You think about China and Chinese employees, and North Korea has been infiltrating a lot of remote work situations in order to gain access to those initial accounts for low-level remote work jobs. So there's a lot of fraud actually going on in the remote hiring process. I actually caught a situation where someone had submitted one resume to the HR team, and then when they ran the background check, they submitted their actual resume and education history. So everything came back clean on the background check. But everyone thought that they were an MIT graduate because the resume that they gave to the HR team was not the one that they gave to the background check. So this level of disparity and process is something that the bad actors are taking advantage of. Dragos.com had an incident like this as well. When you're transitioning from a new hire and before your first day, they did a business, they did a personal email compromise, and they tried to then steer that onboarding salesperson's first steps to exfiltrate data. So that's the gap in some of these processes that are being attacked. So we'll save that minute for the digital potato famine. But geopolitically, it's not about borders. It's about identity management. And if you have an HR system, you may need to have two addresses, right? One, which is where they pay their taxes, and one is where they're actually working at the moment, because you have digital nomads, people working all over the world. And where they pay their taxes is going to potentially be their nationality and that identity. And that's the element you have to keep track of. Are they, working for, a terrorist organization? And, they could be, in Texas. It doesn't matter, where they actually have their paycheck sent. It matters, that you track and are aware of their nationality as well now.
You're mentioning a lot of scenarios that I don't think I've heard about or thought about. I think that, like, this can be like a 1 hour discussion on its own. Super interesting as well, by the way. But yeah, and I'm sure Ruby also has something to say on geopolitical situation.
Yeah, I mean, to add maybe a different aspect of what Mike just said, I mean, under the chaotic situation that might be generated in some environments, like you mentioned Russia, Ukraine, Israel, our neighbors, and so on, we see, at least in Israel, we see, I mean, 12 times more attacks, right, than we seen before the 7th of October, which is huge. I mean, we see that on our infrastructure and everywhere else. So that's something that, in a way, is coming from some kind of geopolitical, maybe, um, desires or something to support, your part of the conflict, which is one thing. But under this chaotic situation, we've seen that the fraud situation, not only in hiring and so on, fraud, everything around data exfiltration and extortion, everything that is sextortion oriented, personal kind of attacks, those are increasing very, very significantly. Whether those tied directly to those attacks, to this geopolitical situation, I don't know. However, I'm sure that the geopolitical situation actually amplifies, right? That this is the amplification element that Mike just mentioned before. So from my point of view, we definitely, with the situation, we see that cybersecurity becomes much more important because the number of attacks is really going up very or increasing very significantly. And with the fact that Matt just mentioned that cybersecurity budgets are going down, again, efficiency on the budgets will be the key word for 2024, which if we talk about predictions, that's one of the things that we need to do. Efficient security and not only cybersecurity.
I promise that we'll have another webinar at the end of 2024 and see if your guys' predictions were like spot on. And we're about, our time is over, our time is up. I want to thank you
But
guys
Mike,
for being here, you
but
and our
Mike,
audience.
maybe
Wait,
Mike
I get
can
to throw
suggest.
out just
Yeah,
that one little teaser. I have to deliver on it, right?
yeah.
So this
Okay,
idea of a
okay.
digital potato famine, everyone's probably familiar with the actual Irish potato famine, which was due to a monoculture crop, which was hit with a blight. And all of the potatoes were wiped out, and there was a famine, and it was much suffering was experienced. So I predict, and this is something I predicted for the last 2 years, and it hasn't happened yet, but because more and more threat actors are getting into the business of developing malware, I'm suspecting that one of them is going to cut corners on their QA of the malware. And they're going to release some malware that's going to brick a whole bunch of devices. So you can't even go to the Genius bar, at the Apple store and have your iPhone fixed. So I'm predicting a massive depopulation event of iPhones. Why? Because everyone stays up to date on the iOS, which is not a good resilience thing, actually. If you think about the Android, if you're writing malware, you have to write for so many different OEMs and so many different flavors of Android. That's actually a factor of resilience in the Android market. It's also a factor of weakness, right? Because no one's patching and there's all these vulnerabilities. But it makes it harder for the bad actors to write one little payload that could wipe out several million devices. And so anyway, that's my digital potato famine prediction, is that there will be a piece of rogue malware that wasn't QA'd properly, and the bad actors will be unhappy because they're not going to get paid because they just bricked your phone, right? You can't send someone a recovery code if you wrote bad malware that can't actually decrypt the thing that you messed up. So anyway, thank you for letting me jump in that last little bit of prediction.
Okay, as I promised, we'll meet again at the end of the year. And if not the end of 2024, then at the end of 2025, and we'll see what happened. And again, thank you guys for being here with us. It was really insightful. And thanks for our audience for joining us today and taking the time out. And have a safe 2024.
Thank you. Great to see
You
you
too.
again, Matthew and Ruvi, and look forward to working on spreading more awareness about how to do good security and do it well.
Amen. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.